Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. I'm sure everyone here that's so tech savvy will appreciate the following messages. Number one, our Wi-Fi is Rutherford Hayes, capital R and capital H, assuming you know how to spell Rutherford, since some people haven't. I understand the hashtag for the event will be Strengthening Society for those that are going to Twitter during. And third, for those that aren't doing either, we would appreciate that cell phones be turned off so they don't interrupt by ringing during the presentations. Our program, of course, will be posted on the Heritage website following today's presentations, as well as the internet viewers are welcome to send questions or comments, simply emailing us at any time at speaker@heritage.org. Opening our program this morning, and I thought our panelists were going to be up here ahead of time, but I guess they're going to come with Jennifer, is Jennifer Marshall, who serves as Vice President for our Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity.
Hi there. Well, good morning, everybody here, and those watching online and on the archive. Welcome to our guests and panelists. It's my pleasure to be hosting this conversation today. As John said, I lead something called the Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity here at Heritage. We launched this in June on the premise that the character of our culture very much determines our capacity to live free, to flourish economically, and to lead on the world stage. And in July, we debuted the first edition of what will become an annual publication, the Index of Culture and Opportunity, and that is the subject of our discussion today. With this report, we are seeking to enlarge the conversation about opportunity so that it looks beyond mere economic data points. We think it's critical to look at the strength of marriage, family, community, and culture at large if we're going to talk about expanding the horizons of all Americans. All but one of our panelists today contributed to the Index of Culture and Opportunity, and the additional guest is exemplifying one of the traits that we want to observe about some things that are going right in American culture. What we do in the index is to track 31 indicators of culture, poverty and dependence, education, and economics in America. And we look at the last 10 years of available data for each of these indicators to determine whether it is going in the right track or on the wrong track when it comes to opening the doors of opportunity. And for what was very interesting to me as an editor of this project, once we tallied up and put the right track, wrong track scores for these 31 indicators together, was to take a step back and to look at the commonalities among those indicators that are heading in the right direction. And I had a couple of observations about that are kind of our hypothesis about how we can start getting things going in a better direction for our society in America. And those were these couple of factors. Number one, the indicators on the right track are ones that we've had pretty big national conversations about for some time. And the second aspect of them that they seem to have in common on the right track was that that we have focused on both policy and on cultural, interpersonal, community kind of initiatives. So both policy and cultural initiatives are important here. And because of that, we want to think about those dimensions of the wrong track indicators as well, so we can get more of those wrong track indicators moving over into the right track for the betterment of American society. And so we thought we would study one of those issues that is on the right track, and that is the abortion rate. Now, abortion remains a serious problem in American society. One abortion is too many abortions. But the news is that the abortion rate has been going in the right direction, and you're going to hear more about that. And so we thought by studying the issue of life, we might be able to learn some things that we could apply to some other arenas as well. And so today the conversation is going to begin in our first panel with the issue of life, and then we're going to move to our second panel where we will try to apply those lessons and make some contrasting and comparing observations about the issue of life, and then the issue of marriage, family, and community more generally. So with that, I want to say thank you to our co-hosts for today's program. National Review Institute is co-sponsoring this with us. I'm very grateful to Lindsay Craig, Katie Pedke, and Catherine Jean Lopez for helping us plan today and execute it and get the word out via Twitter and many other dimensions of social media as we go forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend Catherine Jean Lopez, and she'll moderate our first panel.
Thank you, Jennifer. Many of you know me from National Review Online. I've bugged a lot of you over the years to write things at various times. At the National Review Institute now, I'm a senior fellow, which gives me the opportunity to focus on things like today. Jennifer and I have been talking about something like this for a very long time, so we're grateful to have the opportunity. The idea being to encourage good things that are happening in the world. I'm a firm believer that politics will never get better unless our culture is getting better, and we're highlighting good things and encouraging people who are doing good things. So that's what we're trying to do today. And with that, we have Paul Isaacs, who is the Vice President of Ministry Advancement at Save the Storks, and Chuck Donovan, who's the President of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and is no stranger, I don't think, to anybody in this room. Part of what we want to do is sort of download from the two of you what good things are happening and maybe how we can help both further progress on life, but also help people on some other issues, maybe especially marriage and family, which is really at the core of so much, right? So let me start with Paul because you've come from out of town, so I really want people to meet you. So first of all, tell me about ministry advancement. What is at the heart of Save the Storks? And I'm particularly interested in how you partner with people who are already doing good things.
Right. We, at Save the Storks, we want everybody to know, first of all, that we are for the pregnancy resource centers. We exist to put tools in their hands to what we say is make the boat go faster. So let me illustrate what I mean by that. Back in the 90s, there was this yachtsman who was from New Zealand, who had been hired by the New Zealanders to win back the Stars and Stripes trophy. They had lost consecutive trophies, and so they wanted to win that thing back. Yachting is big in New Zealand, kind of like football is in the United States. And every decision this guy made, he made with one grid and one filter. Every sail, the size of the boat, everything they did, that went through this question that he asked, will it make the boat go faster? And so when we think about life at Save the Storks, we think about the approach that we're taking, and we think the question that we should ask in this culture that has made it legal to take the life of the unborn is, will it save more lives? So that's the question that we are trying to answer. Is what we're doing saving lives? And we see some great things happening in policy and in legislation all across the country. But we also want to go to where the women are, and so we think that taking the idea of a mobile ultrasound unit in a van and putting it across the street legally from a abortion clinic or a Planned Parenthood, and being there and just in a winsome and in a fun way approaching women as they're going to walk into that building and say, would you be interested in seeing a free image of your baby, a free ultrasound?
Now, how do you do that in a winsome and fun way?
Well, you know, there's three ways.
It tends to be a tense situation out there.
It does, and I can say this, there's three ways that we can approach injustice in this world. A lot of people approach it through anger because we think of this issue of life and we think of abortion, and it can naturally arouse those of us who believe that life begins at conception and we care about this baby. We can approach it with anger, and we can go that direction. We could also think that we can never make it a difference, and so we could approach it with apathy. But at Storks, we want to take a different posture. We want to approach it with a brokenness for that woman that will lead to action and compassion. And so we can have fun with that. We can put a smile on our face and realize that showing an image of a baby that's been aborted may not be the thing that makes the boat go faster. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a young person in a T-shirt that's got crazy hair but has a passion for life and a tattoo on their arm and kind of disarms people with a beautiful bus and something that says "Save the Storks" on their shirt. And people are like, "Save the Storks?" Wait a minute, who's killing storks? And we chose the language even to disarm people because everybody's about saving something. Even if you're on the left, you're about saving the whales or saving the spotted owls. But when people see one of our shirts or they see us walking around with something about Save the Storks, they're concerned that there are storks being killed. And so it starts a fun conversation. And we want to start a conversation, not a debate. And we believe that there's a good place for debate. We believe there's a great place for legislation. But we also want to come alongside women and offer them a different choice, because what we found also is that 84% of post-abortive women thought that that was their only option. And so we want to offer more options than that.
Chuck, pregnancy resource centers, crisis pregnancy centers, ultrasounds really have made a tremendous difference in this whole debate, haven't they? Talk a little bit about that and perhaps to what more Washington and others can do to support these.
Well, one of the things that's for sure, Catherine, is that I'm not a candidate for hair color or tattoos. Been at this issue for a long, long time. And as I see it, there have been 3 major phases to date in the battle for life, or the discussion or the debate, if you don't want to call it a battle, and there are lots of reasons not to. The first phase was the constitutional phase, where the Supreme Court handed the country an edict. And the initial phase of the life movement, when I was out on the street more or less with the other young activists, was the intent to reverse that decision and do it quickly as a matter of justice. We thought it was achievable. And within a decade of the decision, 1983, there was a conclusive vote in the Congress over 2 measures that would have had that effect. Both of them failed, one of them narrowly by a vote, a single vote in the U.S. Senate. But when you get your vote, your major vote on an issue in Washington, you're sometimes dead in the water. The reason that didn't happen for the pro-life movement was the second phase, which I call the pregnancy center movement. Now, it had been there from the beginning. Most of the major pregnancy center national networks and international networks are creations of the early 70s. But an organization named CareNet came along and brought in evangelical support for the pregnancy center movement, pretty much in the wake of the failure in Congress. And that was your second phase. And you'll see when you look at the heritage indicators that that is the period at which the abortion rate peaked in the United States, and it began to fall, and fall steadily. And in fact, most of the fall has occurred before the period analyzed in that report. So then we've gotten to the third phase. What is that? Well, I think it's the integrative phase. It's the phase where the pregnancy center movement and the fact that Roe has not settled in as accepted policy are now moving in an almost unified fashion. Pregnancy center movement needs to lead. Statutory changes at the state level are still rapid. This has not happened with any other Supreme Court decision that I can think of other than Dred Scott, where basically it did not settle in as settled law. It roiled the country and people looked for a better answer. So I think we're seeing that the pregnancy center movement is essential. It's growing. It's volunteer. It's not tax paid. American people especially appreciate that. And I see everything is on the onward and upward for the pregnancy care movement.
One of the things I wrote about in the intro to the culture section of the index that we're here to talk about and break down a little bit is that it's actually encouraging to me that those who support a legal abortion never use the word, have to talk in euphemisms, because the American people haven't accepted this and are looking for better answers. And that's why so many people just care about the woman who's in a difficult situation. And if we can show them that there's help for a woman in a difficult situation, that's going to make all the difference, isn't it? Paul, so tell me exactly, how are you working with pregnancy resource centers beyond the bus? Are you roping women into a whole network of help?
Right. Well, we exist for them so that we can put tools in their hands. The primary tool we put in their hands now is a stork bus or a stork van, a mobile unit that has that ultrasound in it. And we have more coming out every month. I think last January, I think we only had 1 out. We were scratching and clawing as this ministry and nonprofit. And now we have, I think, 8 or 9 out, with 1 coming out for the next month, in the next month for 5 months. We have some new things that I'm not at liberty to share that are coming out that are so exciting. They're going to be coming out hopefully in the next 6 months that are going to reach women earlier in their pregnancy. And we just are trying to get to women through that pregnancy center and offer them at a place of brokenness choices. And so again, I can't say it enough. The pregnancy centers he mentioned, that's where there's boots on the ground. Those are the people. We provide training for their counselors, their sidewalk counselors. It's interesting, where there is a sidewalk counseling or a sidewalk presence, the number of abortions and the no-show rates just goes down. It's like 75% in some cases. It's amazing that sometimes those abortion clinics will not open to do abortions they cease doing them because of that sidewalk ministry. So we do that. We do consulting with them. We do a number of things. We try to offer them help in their marketing because I think that's a big thing that we want to do better. We know that Planned Parenthood does a great job at marketing. We think that the PRCs should do just as good, if not better job. So the youthful movement that we have, I think, has something to offer PRCs.
So you're currently on the ground in a number of states. How are people hearing about you?
Well, we have a social media presence that we're trying, and we realize that's one of the places that you go to effectively reach the next generation. So we're all over Twitter, we're all over that kind of thing, Facebook, Pinterest, believe it or not, things like that. But
to show off the wild hair and the tattoos, right?
Exactly. But we try to be at events, and just kind of tell people the story. We go to churches, we go to schools, we go to, March for Life or different things. So we're just trying our best to, take a posture of humility, but rebrand in some ways the pro-life movement. And I say that not to in any way disparage those who have gone before us, because we honor them and we are so thankful for them. We just realize that as we call this next generation of young people into the pro-life movement, we want to have a different approach in some ways. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about this principle. It says, "There were once men of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do." And we really want to have this understanding of our culture and how to message the pro-life movement so that we can know what to do. So that's kind of the way we take it. And again, I want to just stress a posture of humility and thankfulness for those who have gone before us.
Chuck, Charlotte Lozier, tell us who she is, because that has something to do with messaging and those who have gone before, even before you, Chuck.
Well, not that long before me. In the 19th century, Charlotte, I didn't have tea with her or anything, but Charlotte Lozier was a colleague of Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony is the renowned feminist, the godmother of the suffragist movement in the United States. And Charlotte Denman Lozier was not nearly as prominent, but in many ways she should have been. She was a wife and mother, and she was also a person who forced her way into medical school. Did so by auditing classes, and when she demonstrated, perhaps to the dismay of some, that she was an equal performer in the classroom, they allowed her to complete her studies. So she formed her own practice. She also found time to become the vice president of the National Association of Working Women. So it goes to prove, number one, that since she was thoroughly pro-life, that being a working woman, being a mother of three, being a physician, being for life, and she gave her life for life. She died in childbirth, delivering her last child, who was born and has descendants to this day. But an absolutely unbelievably tremendous woman who didn't sacrifice her career goals for her values, or vice versa. She found a way to put them together. So our institute is devoted to looking at data and looking at better paths forward for mothers, for families, for working, for the family economy, and for life. And if we could do that in the 19th century, we think we can do it in the 21st. And I also think the data point that way. We just completed a study, we haven't released yet, on pregnancy center marketing, which, Paul, you brought up. The pregnancy centers' greatest strength is their popularity with the American people, and I sometimes think they don't really know how popular they are. We asked one question, Catherine, where we presented, here are the four options that we can think of for dealing with an unexpected pregnancy: adoption, marrying the father and raising the child as a single mother, or recommending abortion. 1,300 people, 1,000 of them women, were asked this question: what percentage do you think would recommend abortion? 4%. Now, in actuality, people act as much out of fear as anything else when a decision comes. But if you're a pregnancy center, you know that 96% of the public, 96% of women, think that that clinic is the last resort, then you've just got to get there as best you can. And make those other things in actuality something that works, something that can be done. The pregnancy center saving hundreds of thousands of lives a year. Each one of them is a tremendous story. Telling those stories, they can make that message effective. And when they do, there'll be a lot more Charlotte Denman Loziers out there.
What are you learning about, Paul, about messaging and reaching people and what works? And
Well, we're always learning. We're learning that that you have to, you know, the story, the power of story is so important for this generation. And believe it or not, video, like visual, is important to tell the story. And so we try to use all these forms of media to reach the next generation. But ultimately, it's telling the story. The stories, you know, and the statistics work together, obviously. But we live in that kind of a culture that values the story. And so as we try to tell the story, and as we think about how 3 out of 5 women that get on a stork unit to see an image of their baby end up choosing life, we want to tell those stories. So we work with the pregnancy centers to get those stories, to tell those stories via newsletters and emails and, you know, Facebook, and anything we can do to celebrate the stories of life, of the life-saving that we're trying to accomplish. We're going to do it.
And the story you're talking about is this was her last resort.
Exactly.
And had that bus not been there.
Right. We have stories of women. I brought some in with my folder today where they were coming either by themselves or with their boyfriend or their husband, thinking that this is an easy choice. I don't have the resources, or I have to do this. I have to end the life of this baby. Where they come and they just are somehow mesmerized by this, in this one particular story, a blue van, and they end up going on this van and seeing the image, and then the choice is clear that they must keep this baby. And even though they don't see the way clear, this one particular couple, they said, we don't know how this is going to play out, but we're going to have this baby. And even though we're still afraid, and even though there's still tears, we're choosing to have this baby. We have stories like that, and we want to tell it.
Chuck, I was following the Massachusetts buffer zone case very closely last year, and this woman, Eleanor McCullen, who was the lead plaintiff in the case, who just stands outside an abortion clinic. I shouldn't say just. She stands outside an abortion clinic, the main abortion clinic in Boston, and is simply, you know, a last sign of hope and love. And her sign says, "Hope, love, life." She gives people her cards, even if they went in and had the abortion anyway, because she knows they need help afterward. But I was also struck by how virulent the opposition was to insist that she can't stand outside on the sidewalk. That even so much so that Massachusetts rewrote a buffer zone, so there is one again once the Supreme Court shut down the first one. Why is it, Chuck, that does the abortion rights movement realize the progress that's being made? And are things like having buffer zones sort of a last line of defense to try to keep progress from being made? Is there some way the two sides can work together and make choice real? You know, what are your thoughts about all of that?
Well, those are perennial and very, very large questions, Catherine. It'd be nice to think that there could be a working together. I think that the vast majority of the culture of the American people can work together. I do think we are affected by, and other issues affect, the state of American optimism. I feel as if probably the greatest transformation I've seen in this country in the last 40 years is probably what's happened in the last 10. Which is a settling in of very dire pessimism about just about everything. About economic growth, right. About medical progress.
When you started talking about optimism in the last decade, I was wondering where you were hanging out.
Well,
I wanted to hang out there too.
It's just not there. And I do think men and women have kind of concluded at certain levels, I don't mean to be quotable, that in some ways we just can't get along. And so much of what's described as our battle for social and economic equality is a lack of understanding the best equality comes by working with cooperation for a higher goal. Even Emma Watson seems to be getting a little bit of that at the United Nations. It wasn't half a bad message to say that men have a stake in the equality of women.
we all have a stake in our mutual confidence. Yes, things happen, and unexpected, let me give you a number. Unexpected pregnancy. This is one of the impacts of marriage. We've seen a recent decline in the rate at which unexpected pregnancies are aborted. Now, something intuitive of that may bother someone who's an abortion activist on the other side of that issue. But there are differences as to whether an unexpected pregnancy is aborted, as you would expect, between a single mother or single woman, a couple that is cohabiting, and a couple that is married. If you are a married couple, only 20% of unexpected pregnancies are aborted. Still too high. If you are a cohabiting couple, it's 39%. It's twice as high. But the interesting thing is it's dropped by 26% over the last decade. Only among single mothers is the rate of unexpected pregnancy being aborted actually increased in the last decade. Well, what explains that to me is the lack of confidence. Cohabitation brings insecurity as well as some security about the future. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that a little later. But with respect to the married couple, they deal with the unexpected much more effectively. So I think it's critical that we recover some sense as a people that the future can be better, our country can be stronger in every way, and strengthening the family is the core of that. But we do need to be concerned about those other 30 indicators Heritage is looking at.
Do you see that optimism on the ground,
Right.
Paul?
Absolutely. I feel hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist. I believe we're going to end abortion in our day. I believe in a...
And what does it mean to end abortion in our day?
Well,
it's not merely laws you're talking about, but that's part of it.
I think we're going to see the end of legalized abortion in our day. I think evil will always be present in the world. You know, we ended the Holocaust in Germany, but we haven't ended genocides across the world. So I'm not foolhardy enough to believe that that there will be no abortions. I just feel hopeful in a world that I know is going to get worse and worse because of my religious beliefs. I do feel hopeful in this issue. I believe that, like Chuck has mentioned, I think there are indicators that give us hope. But I also believe as we take a posture of humility toward the woman and that brokenness, as opposed to that posture of anger, I think that speaks to women. And I think there's things coming in terms of medicine and some things that we're trying to accomplish that are going to change the game. And so I think more and more pro-abortionists, and I use that word, in a way that I don't mean to be derogative, but I think they're going to be marginalized more and more.
And that's because, as we've been discussing, most Americans aren't pro-abortion.
I agree, yes.
They just want to know that a woman in a hard case is going to have help,
right,
or have an option.
And I think
you're on the ground providing options.
Right. Absolutely. That's what we're there for.
Chuck, talk about medicine. And so many parents who get bad prenatal diagnosis are constantly talking about these stories where their doctor just wants to end the pregnancy. Sometimes the child, there's nothing wrong in the end. Sometimes, yes, there are challenges, but there are endless stories about what hope these children bring to lives if they do wind up with Down syndrome or sure, whatever their handicap or disability might be. How is medicine progressing to help embrace life and support life and help families and single mothers
sure,
embrace life?
This is a brief, but I have to get it exactly right, so I'm going to read you a quotation and ask you where it's from. Care at the center is shaped by our belief that the fetus is a separate patient. Therefore, every member of our multidisciplinary team is an expert in caring for unborn babies, their mothers, and families. Now, you would think it came from Paul's mobile clinic, right? It's from Philadelphia Children's Hospital.
Wow.
This is their perinatal unit. It was the first in the United States to do a fetal surgery, 1981, just 33 years ago. 2 years ago, they did their 1,000th, and they had a big celebration at the hospital These are babies that are being operated while they're in the womb. And we're now up to about 14 different major conditions for which these babies, as early as 17, 18 weeks, can be treated, just as this says, as a separate patient. And we're headed for more. In fact, this fetal unit, which is the Center for Diagnosis and Treatment, is integrated within their pediatric hospital. What immediately occurs, I think somebody's been watching news out of Philadelphia, this hospital is 1 mile from Dr. Gosnell's clinic. Now, you don't have to wax biblical to talk about a choice of life or death being set in front of a country. But is our vision of medical care and care for the youngest patient in our midst what Dr. Gosnell provided, or what was available at the highest tech center on the planet? How do we choose an inequality that says some women can be shuttled to one place where their lives of their babies and their own are at risk, and others can see the benefit of cutting-edge medicine, developing special techniques, surgeries, instruments to save our younger children? This is the contradiction. I mean, even Justice O'Connor, it's been 20 years now in the Casey decision, said this decision is on a collision course with itself. It is, and that's not going to change. The ultrasound has opened the window of diagnosis and recognition of the child. Coming from the other end is a recognition that this patient can be helped. In the case of Down syndrome, there's some evidence that abortion of Down syndrome children is decreasing in the United States. We need to push it farther because it's an example of disability discrimination. These are wanted children who were greeted at the time of their conception and as the pregnancy progressed, and then it was recognized that they have a difficulty. Science, ethics, morality says, deal with the difficulty, help the parents adjust to the shock of a change. But let's move forward for life. And the best science, the best medicine, the best ethics are doing that.
Paul, we only have about 5 more minutes for this part of the session. And I just wanted to ask you about, you were talking about stories earlier. Tell us how you got involved in this, why you got involved in this.
Right.
In a very quick,
Right.
quick version, of course. And what stories are most inspiring and you think would be most inspiring, not just for people doing work in the pro-life movement,
Right.
or to help build a culture of life, but who are trying to build a family
Right.
and just rebuild a civilization or a society that is strong.
I've always been pro-life. My wife and I never felt necessarily a place in the movement because of we were in campus ministry reaching college students. And so our lifeblood was to reach out to college students and help them understand the gospel. And but we were all about life to the point where we felt like God called us to adopt. And so we have 3 biological children, and we adopted a little girl from China. And she's 7 years old and 35 pounds, and big things come in small packages. She's something else. I was also asked to run for office when we lived in Ohio based on an issue called the Heartbeat Bill. And the Heartbeat Bill was not being passed by the Ohio Republicans, the Senate. And we had a 24-9 majority, and there were people that had reasons for and against why that bill should not be passed. But for me, I understood that, and I took it to this point. If there's a bill that says you cannot take the life of the child once you detect the heartbeat, that's a no-brainer to me. Let's pass that bill. And so someone asked me to run for office to try to move that forward, and I did. But it wasn't in God's plan for me to win that race. But it was in God's plan for me to continue pursuing this passion for life. And so I found a group of people, this young people, and I read an article that said how some young people with a van are changing the pro-life movement. And that little article on Facebook just rocked my wife and I's world. And we've been a part of this movement since. And real quick, stories that are important. One of the people that we work with, Abby Johnson, I think she's an exciting figure, an exciting person. She's on our board of advisors. She actually has a ministry where she communicates with the abortion workers.
And she, of course, used to be a director of
Yes,
Planned Parenthood.
yes, they're in College Station, Texas, I think it is. And so she has this ministry where she connects with those workers there in the clinic and tells them that she's praying for them, that she loves them, that there's help and hope for them, and if any of them want to get out of the abortion industry, that they will cut them a check for 3 months of their salary. They'll pay for any legal fees, counseling fees, and pay for a personal spiritual retreat. And I thought, man, that sounds like that's a great thing. That's putting your money where your mouth is. And then I found out over 90 people have come out of the abortion industry because of that. That kind of love and compassion has moved me to work with storks.
She has, Abby Johnson in her book Unplanned, I think is what it's titled, has a story about a Catholic nun who was outside her clinic one day weeping. And everyone who was working inside the clinic sort of went to the window sheepishly, but she's at the time, she didn't think there was anything wrong with what she was doing, although she was struggling with it. But the mere fact that someone would be so bothered by what was going inside that she was weeping, it just had such an effect. And I think that's part of the success of that particular ministry. The mere fact that someone cares about what's happening in that building that much, you know. Chuck, we're talking about lots of cultural indicators in this book, and the next panel is going to be about marriage and family. What are some of the lessons from the last 4 decades of the pro-life movement that maybe could apply to strengthening the family and marriage?
Well, I certainly have seen the way in which these issues interplay. We cannot look at the state of the economy and think it isn't going to create all sorts of pressures, even for married couples that were not there before. We can't look at the state of government policy. I've been a long-time advocate of child tax credits. They now lag well behind. We all hear it's part of that depressing atmosphere that it takes to $264,000, whatever it is this year, to raise a child. And with no attention paid to the fact that nearly every human being on this planet is a net economic plus. Otherwise, economic growth cannot happen. And so we focus on the investment side. Parents do need help with the investments. The delay in marriage, though, is exposing, I think, given what we know about unexpected pregnancy, which seems to have actually, it's a fairly persistent level. The idea that we have a technical solution to a relational issue is, to me, a little bit chimerical. But the idea that we can move away from marriage without exposing more children to risk because the couple doesn't have that mutual confidence, I think is something that people involved in these issues need to look at. They need all sorts of civil society institutions to be robust. Government can supply the physical things. It doesn't supply love. It doesn't fill relational gaps. It doesn't provide a father's hand at night when a child is crying, or to give a mother a break when the child's unable to sleep. That mutuality is irreplaceable. Government cannot do it. And if we want to fix all of society, if we want to fix the life issue, we've got to fix all the other issues that go along with it.
And one of the most encouraging things to me is that in the brokenness of cultural, current culture, there are people who are willing to walk with women and walk with families, and hopefully Washington can help support that more and know it too and be encouraged. So thank you very much, both of you. And
thank you,
we're moving on to our next panel now.
Thanks very much, Catherine and Paul and Chuck, for that very interesting discussion, and I think you can see already why we wanted to have these two conversations together. We're going to ask our second panelists to come up on stage, and let me introduce them as they're doing so. We're really pleased that Brad Wilcox could be here with us today. Brad is at the University of Virginia, and he's one of the leading sociologists on marriage and family-related issues in the country. He is also a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and he leads the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, which is a very important project and produces an annual study that on the state of our unions that is one that lots of people watch for the developments on these issues. Brad also contributed an essay on marriage and divorce to our Index of Culture and Opportunity. Christine Kim is my colleague here at the Heritage Foundation. She is a policy analyst in the Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity. And she is also pursuing her PhD at Georgetown on these issues as well. She's been enormously helpful contributing to our empirical work on the family and religion here in America. Yeah, please do join me on stage, please do. And we just so appreciate her quantitative work that helps us really explain why family, marriage, religious practice, how they contribute to the common good in America, and why we need to have these as a part of our discourse about public policy. So I'm going to have a seat with our guests, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these marriage and family issues. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Christine, I'd like to start with you and just ask you were really helpful in kind of editing the project as a whole. And so you had a chance to survey all the data. And I just wanted to kind of get the facts on the table about what we're talking about. We heard some good news when it came to the abortion rate. What's the basic news that we present here on the family and some of the key indicators there? Could you just introduce that?
Sure. So we have 31 indicators. So it's very hard to choose when you have a lot of markers that tell us where we are in society in terms of marriage and family. And so we looked at, in particular, marriage rate, divorce rate, percent of children living in single-parent household, and also the unwed birth rate as some of the key indicators telling us a little bit about where we are in terms of family and marriage. So the news here, I think it's a little bit mixed, a little bit less promising perhaps than the abortion rate. The clear fall with that is just, if you read this index, it's very clear. With marriage rate, it's falling. So if you look at the graph, it's very, very clear. One, I think people are delaying marriage, and if you've been reading news articles, you've been hearing about that. Men and women are marrying later. For men, it's 29. For women, it's 20, I think 27 almost. So people are delaying marriage. And so if you look at the current population, the percent of people who are currently married, that has dropped as well. And so there are more people who've never been married. There are more people who are divorced in the greater population. So we see that sort of decline in marriage overall. So that's one trend in terms of just marriage. On the divorce front, which has also been talked a lot about in the news, and we have this here in our indicator, we've just looked at a divorce rate, so number of divorces per population. Here the news, I think, is a little bit more mixed. Obviously, since the mid-1960s, divorce rates peaked, and then it fell after peaking in really the early 80s. We see actually a little bit of falling in the crude divorce rate. And then it kind of just plateaued a little bit. And more recent research is showing essentially that divorce rate is still really, really high among older, really the boomer generation. They are continuing to divorce at a higher rate. Remarriage rates for divorce for remarriage is also higher. So you can see sort of a cohort effect. These are the individuals who grew up in post-World War II era, and they divorced at higher rate in the 1980s, 90s, and they continue to do so, even now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the glimmer, I think, of sort of hope is that younger young adults, the younger generation, their marriages are actually a little bit more stable. So here's a cohort effect. And so whether it's because they're delaying marriages a little bit, so they're a little bit older when they get married, instead of what you think of, oh, you got pregnant as a teen, or early 20s, you got married in these less stable marriages. So maybe that's one effect. Maybe selectivity. People are finishing their education and they're finding better matches, whatever. So the younger cohort, we see a little bit more stability with the divorce trend. So it's a little bit more of a mixed marriage here. But with marriage and divorce, I think another really big sort of picture is that we have to think about the children involved as well. And we are seeing that trend that a smaller percentage of children living in two-parent families, specifically also married biological family. About 6 out of 10 children in the US right now are living with two married biological parents, a little bit higher if you just look at just two parent situation. So that's been declining for decades. The decline has slowed a little bit in the last 10 years as we track in our indicators here, but it's still declining. And in more recent decade, that's really driven by the percent of birth there are to unmarried women, the out of wedlock or unwed birth rate. That's a phenomenon we tend to think of as teen pregnancy. We see MTV shows about teen moms, but it's actually a 20-something phenomenon. Women in their 20s are having children, not marrying and having children. That's what we're seeing here. So those are some trends with really broad implications, not just individual. Obviously, that's very important to the the men and women who are in our society getting married and living out their lives, but also the children involved. But also, I think with really broad implications, and we're seeing those trends now. From research, 30, 40 years of research coming out showing the broader societal implications as well.
Great, thank you very much, Christine. Great overview. Brad, I want to turn to you and ask just a wide open question because you do scan so much data on these issues. Why does this matter? Why does it matter that we're seeing some declining trends on marriage and family?
Well, I think we have to realize that when it comes to sort of the American dream today and the sort of kind of mobility question a lot of folks are focusing on today, there are really three pillars to the American dream. There are three pillars to mobility, to making it in America today. One, of course, is education. Two, of course, is work. And the third is marriage and a stable family for most Americans and for most kids. And so that both kids and adults, men and women who are getting married, staying married, having kids in marriage, are much more likely to flourish economically. Men are more likely to work more hours, to be more strategic in their work, and to earn more in terms of their income. And at the community level, the ecological level, we're seeing, based upon some research done by Raj Chetty at Harvard, is that there is kind of a neighborhood effect, there's a sort of a regional effect, whereby kids who are being raised in communities with lots of two-parent families are themselves more likely to experience, if they grow up poor, rags to riches mobility over the course of their lives. So for both individual kids, for individual men and women, and for entire communities, what we're seeing basically is that marriage matters when it comes to increasing mobility, increasing the odds that kids and adults and communities can really foster and promote the American dream. So that's, I think, one important point. But to be frank, I think one of the limitations of this discussion is it sort of makes marriage and family instrumental goods. Not intrinsic goods. It sort of reduces them to this idea, well, if you get married and stay married, you're going to be healthier, you're going to live longer, you're going to make more money, you're going to be richer. And on average, all those things are true, right? But I think the other big point here that we need to sort of remember is that, and even the recent nuptials of George Clooney, I mean, that marriage doesn't really matter if you're rich or poor, religious or secular, a Hollywood star or just Joe Blow. Marriage still is the gold standard across the world. This is not a Christian thing. It's not a conservative thing. This is a human thing. And I think what I'm most concerned about in this growing marriage divide in this country, that is that those who are college educated are doing pretty well on the marriage front and the family front. Most of their kids, the vast majority of kids, are being born into married households. They're going to remain in married households. But working class and poor Americans are falling behind. And there's a growing marriage divide in America. And the problem with that, beyond just all the economic and the social and the psychological outcomes, is that what it suggests is that sort of the possibility of lifelong love, between adults and a lifelong love where kids have that experience in the family context of their parents being united together, in marriage for life, is increasingly out of reach, for a large swath of our population. I think that is also got to be an important part of our thinking and our messaging around this issue. It's not just an instrumental good, it's an intrinsic good, and one which should be available to every American, regardless of their education, income, race, or ethnicity.
Right, thank you. And when you say lower educated, less income, those with less income are falling behind in marriage, you're talking about the fact that they're less likely to be married before having a child and so on. And so these create powerful dynamics on the subjects of like inequality and mobility that are so much a part of the policy conversation, as you pointed out. And on the last panel, we talked both about policy and culture being a part of these, the background of these indicators, and in turn the indicators contribute to the development on these fronts in policy and culture. What would you say, Brad, are the policy things that may not be helping, may indeed be hurting when it comes to the culture of marriage?
Well, I think, what many sort of observers of the American political scene have noted is that we haven't had much success on the policy front in really turning the marriage numbers in a better direction. And the Healthy Marriage Initiative that was launched by the Bush administration, has had some modest successes, primarily in Oklahoma, but by and large didn't, do a lot for this issue. And so I think some people think we should just, wash our hands of the whole issue and move on to something else. But I think one thing we haven't really thought about is the fact that we did achieve a lot with welfare reform when it came to encouraging more single mothers to enter into the workforce and to, to be engaged in the workplace and to bring home more money for themselves and for their families. So there are, examples in the recent political landscape that would be, I think, encouraging. And more specifically, I think when it comes to marriage, the first idea should be, first, do no harm. And right now, about a third of Americans are receiving some kind of means-tested benefit, from Medicaid to food stamps. And the unfortunate reality, the unintended reality, is that most of these programs penalize marriage for people who have kids. And so as a sort of first step, I think we need to sort of think about ways in which we can eliminate or at least reduce the marriage penalty embedded in so many of our public policies that are affecting so many people. And if we could do that, we might see I think some real policy impact at a much wider level than just funding a few relationship skills programs or marriage, training programs that were funded under the Bush administration. So that's one piece. But I think the point that you made just now and it was made earlier this morning is that these things will not turn in a new direction. Chuck, I think, made this point earlier today. Will not turn in a new direction unless we're, addressing, issues from both the policy and the cultural and the civic dimensions. And we need a kind of coordinated campaign like we did around smoking, like we have had around teenage pregnancy, where a lot of different actors are lining up. And when that happens, you can see, the behavior is shifting in a better direction.
And we've made that comparison here quite a bit, that, what if we had campaigns on marriage like we did on seatbelts or smoking or stay in school, et cetera. So I wonder, Christine, if you could kind of comment on that and the overall cultural, what can we do culturally? You particularly look at young people's attitudes and on all these issues. So maybe you could just enlighten us a little bit on that.
Yeah, thinking about, I think just listening to the previous panel talking about this life issue, we know that attitudes can change, culture can change, that the younger generation is more pro-life than the previous generation at that age. So they can certainly change, our attitudes can change about marriage and where we're headed. I think young people, like Brad said, there is marriage still the gold standard. People want to get married, they want to have children, they think that's good, it's important in life. But then I think from that sort of standard, the gold standard, there's a disconnect in the reality of, well, then I have a lot of doubts. I've seen a lot of divorces happen, so I don't know if the person I'm going to marry, I'll be committed to them for the rest of my life. A much higher percentage will say, I don't know if I'm going to stay married to this one person for the rest of my life. They're much more open to, well, do we absolutely need marriage, a mom and a dad, in order to have kids? So there's a decoupling of marriage and parenthood with that. And then sort of being more open to alternatives. Well, maybe let's just live together and try it out before committing to this marriage thing that it's so scary because, I don't want to get married and then fail and need a divorce. So I think there's a lot of ambivalence among young people, the goal that they want and then the reality. And you see that actually played out in patterns. The delaying marriage, rise in cohabitation, and a lot of young people are, half the children born to young people are actually born out of, outside of marriage. So it's much higher than just the overall married rate. So there's that disconnect. But I think what I was thinking about Brad's comment about the intrinsic versus the instrumental good is that part of the shift is that, we think of marriage as, you go to the altar or you sign a marriage certificate and it's done. But it's not. It's a much more longer term, endeavor and project. There is, working out the daily aspect of marriage. And I think young people may not see that for whatever, reason, because they grew up in a home where, mom and dad weren't always there. About actually half the children in America will spend some time in a non-intact family. So they're just exposed to different sort of norms. And then you think about the community level. For certain young people at the community level, there's a very, very high percentage of, single parent households. So the norm for them is, this is not what we're used to. So changing part of the culture and attitude, I think, is, I was reading some of Brad's reports, we went from, treating marriage as a cornerstone to capstone, sort of. It used to be people, it's okay. Part of being an adult is working out in marriage. Get married, get a job, and let's, be an adult here. But now we think we have to do everything. We've got to get our education. We have to get a great job. We have to be financially secure. We had to pay, be able to pay our wedding in order to get married. But what if we start to shift that and again say, yes, marriage is still desirable, but there's a reality too, and it's okay to work through that reality and to have that modeling at the individual level, seeing our own, family and friends at the community level, seeing neighbors, in committed marriages, and it's not perfect day to day, but there's that working out and being committed in the long term, and the national level, sort of having these conversations, and seeing even Hollywood change, sort of commitment, what that means. So you have to work at it, I think, a little bit by little bit, but I think the life lesson here is that culture can change, attitudes can change, even among young people. Even when we seem to be headed in one direction, it can reverse.
Thank you. And it's interesting. I'm wondering, Brad, how much you attribute to that national conversation we had around welfare reform about the importance of marriage as an antidote to child poverty. Sometimes policies, just the debate of them, how much we talk and spend time thinking about them, can have a cultural effect, even absent policy being very specifically enacted. How do you think about that episode and what we might take from it to make more difference in the future?
Yeah, no, I think the policy debates and arguments can have a big impact on the culture. And so sort of how we engage in those debates and how we talk about the issues that are involved is really important, because as an issue heats up in the public discourse, it does sort of permeate the media dissemination, and it's framed in certain ways. I think, though, on the sort of welfare reform piece, I think for whatever reason, both in terms of the cultural message and the practical policy implications of welfare reform, we did see successes on the work front, but we did not really see successes on the marriage front. And that's, to me, still a question about, was it part of the messaging at that time in the debate, or was it the fact that there really wasn't a big shift in the economic incentives, in the wake of welfare reform? Mm-hmm. There was a big shift in the incentives when it came to work, but not when it came to marriage, in the wake of welfare reform. So maybe it's that if we were able to really address those now disincentives in our public policies, that would help us move the needle more than we've seen in the last 20 years or so.
And that gets back to the marriage penalties and things like that.
It does, yeah. I think that's probably the easiest way. And I think also it's important to frame this as sort of as an equity issue. And I think that both Republicans and Democrats should be able to get behind the idea that if your intention is to get married and have a family, or if you have a child on the way and you want to get married, there shouldn't be a penalty. You shouldn't have more difficulty, for instance, accessing Medicaid if your intention is you've got a baby coming and you want to have that birth in the hospital. And Medicaid would pay for it, if you're not married, but it won't pay for it if you are married. That's a real disincentive. We need to address that kind of problem embedded in our public policies.
So it seems like information is an important tool in this conversation and cultural and policy arena. It would be wonderful if we had more people know that marriage reduces the probability of child poverty by 80%. Brad, your report from the National Marriage Project this year was focusing on the fact that actions before marriage, decisions before marriage, very much affect the trends afterwards. Very interestingly conveyed with your image on the front cover of a little baby in a onesie that said, "What happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas." Right. Very creatively displayed there. But tell us more just of the few takeaways you might have from that about information as an empowering device to help individuals as they make decisions in this arena?
Yeah, I think it's important here in all this in the cultural front that, right now I think there was a piece in the Washington Post this morning basically saying that, family values types need to stop lecturing people about morality on this issue and say we need to strengthen the economic foundations of working class and poor families. And I agree with the latter point, but I think you have to recognize there's not a lot of hectoring going on right now in this culture. But I don't think hectoring is the answer either. I think we have to figure out ways in which we can make marriage and family life more appealing to working class and poor adults, and to kind of give them a message that's hopeful, but also concrete in terms of how do you go from this sort of general aspiration to marriage, which most Americans have, to taking the concrete steps, in the here and now that will increase your odds of forging a stronger marriage down the road. I think also one lesson too we can take from the earlier part of our discussion today is we have to have boots on the ground that are kind of changing the economic incentives at the federal level, advancing a major cultural campaign, through social media and maybe network TV. Those would all be helpful. But there have to be civic organizations on the ground, like CareNet has done, that provide sort of ordinary working class and poor couples with real models, real advice, and real help. I'm thinking here of First Things First in Chattanooga, for instance, as one model for what I'm thinking of. If we don't have that sort of institutional on-the-ground capacity, I don't think most working class and poor couples who may be interested in marriage but sort of hesitant or worried or skeptical about their future together will have kind of the real confidence and the encouragement and the insights that they need to go ahead and get married and forge family in that way.
First Things First is an organization run by Julie Baumgartner in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and she's also the head of the National Association of Relationship and Marriage Education, which brings together a network of these type of organizations from across the country. And what they're doing is just absolutely critical, I would say, on the cultural front, because we have assumed that marital skills, relationship skills would be inherited, and that they would just be passed down from generation to generation and kind of in the air of our culture. I think the data show that we can no longer assume that, and so it's going to take organizations like those associated with NARMI, the National Association of Relationship and Marriage Education, First Things First, to be able to reteach those skills and to really train up the next generation. So very interesting dynamics there. Christine, unless you had something to add, I'll go to the audience for questions. Okay. We have a roving mic. Leslie has that. And if you have questions, we'll take about 10 minutes here, I think, for our panelists. Andrea, please identify yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Andrea Mrozek, Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, and ProWomanProLife.org. So this is an event that's almost uniquely designed for me. I know that where I'm from, and I suspect here as well, the media play a large role in forming public opinion. The media almost universally, sometimes for good reasons, reports the negative. So what we don't hear about are the success stories. And on the abortion front, what you do hear about a lot more are the strategies that I believe are also important alongside pregnancy care, et cetera. But to awaken apathy, we have people show the truth type campaigns. So I was wondering if there's a strategy that you can think of from the first panel or the second to address the fact that the media are not going to be telling a hopeful message on life and marriage. Is there any way to try and inject that message into what the culture at large is hearing through the media?
Would like to take that? Brad, you've got some history dealing with media.
I think one important lesson, which you of course have also learned and acted upon in Canada, is that we have to be as positive as we can in addressing these questions in the media context. But I think it's also important to realize that we do live in a new age, technologically speaking, for better and for worse. But one of the sort of realities today is that there are alternative, gateways that we can open up and work through. It's really not that hard to target any different demographic in the in the U.S. With a dedicated internet strategy. It takes a lot of money, but if there's that sort of money and that devotion, you can kind of establish your own message with hopefully winsome and positive videos and other kinds of social media, et cetera. So I think we have to be creative in thinking about ways that we can kind of reach different parts of the public with a compelling message that advances a strong marriage culture, even when there may not be kind of more elite support for that message.
And I think Save the Storks is a wonderful example of this, which is very thoughtful about what the values that they're trying to communicate, that everyone can embrace, and that how to further the common good. Any other thoughts you have to add to that?
Yeah, I think recognizing your audience and how to reach them in different ways, and I think Brad's point is really good about, we used to think of mainstream media, the networks, and the major papers, but there's so many alternative, I think, avenues now. And so thinking about, you can address a particular, the New York Times reading, Wall Street Journal reading, you can address that crowd through an op-ed. I like what Paul said earlier about the power of story, so we need to do more storytelling. But maybe for a younger generation, it is, Facebook and Twitter, social media. I'm sorry that I don't remember the name. There was a magazine started by a group of young women.
Verily?
Verily, that's right. That's right. Just, so thinking about your target, so that's another very particular demographic, so how do you reach out? It's very well done. I think so the presentation matters. It's very, just really nice to look at, very professional. And so if you're addressing another, a demographic, so just thinking about your audience and how to reach them, how do they respond, I think you can get around the, the major newspapers and the major networks, or Hollywood even, if they're not, sending out the right messaging.
Yes, in the back.
Hi, I'm Maria Grossu with Family Research Council. I had a question for all of the panelists about the role of contraceptives and separating sex from procreation, and then procreation from marriage, if any of you can touch on that.
We could perhaps hand the microphone to Chuck Donovan if you'd like to take that, or do you want to? Okay. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, that is certainly, I think, the major fact of life, to use probably a bad phrase, over the last 40 years. It's the role of contraception is something obviously roils everyone who touches the subject. And I think at the end of the day, we have to get back to a sense that there's an integration that's essential in our lives. If we are going to understand the full meaning of sexuality and try to take it out of the context of the intention for a long-term relationship, I see it in all of the data that I look at. I was touching upon it earlier with unexpected pregnancy. It is a fact of life that there will be, and it's almost a baseline. I mentioned that 39 or 40%. You can go back to the 1970s, and when contraception became so prevalent in our society and so heavily funded, and yet, because the decision to engage in sexual activity is, and its root and engagement of the whole person, there is almost a statistical baseline where you can expect an unexpected pregnancy to occur, and it will occur more frequently unless the relationship is within the context of marriage. So for us to understand how to deal with these things, I think we have to approach it from a whole relational context, realize that the maritally committed couple, whether they practice contraception or not, is going to enjoy so many other benefits with respect to their relationship. It's going to have impact on the abortion rate. It's going to have impact on the stability of their relationships long term. They will even report better sexual satisfaction in their marriages. All of these things that civil society throughout, whether it was religion or culture, tended to reinforce the importance of a permanent relationship. I would say there's been certainly an overall effect of contraception to make that as if it were optional equipment in a relationship, but it's not the reality of the human person. And because we really haven't reconciled ourselves to the fact that it's not the reality of the human person, it's almost as if, and I struggle with it, you cannot really have a rational conversation with people. And we end up with exposing our kids. We now have 30 to 40 major types of contraception we can provide to young people. Wouldn't we have what was promised 4 decades ago. It was promised in the documents. I went back and for this talk today, reread the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future. Everybody ought to reread it. It's a tedious document, but it flipped the United States of America's, and it flipped the Nixon administration. It's kind of embraced Roe v. Wade, by the way. And we felt we could come up with some sort of technical solution to the world's problems. But that document promised less child abuse, less out-of-wedlock pregnancy, said these things would go away. Because once we had only wanted children intended to be created and born, then wouldn't all of these things go away? Poverty would go away. Divorce would be reduced. None of it's happened. And at the end of the day, it's because sexuality is the most important interpersonal commitment we've got. Even you too. Listen to the latest album. That they go back and talk about the fact that we struggle because of the lack of intimacy in our society. Real intimacy. We have all this distracted intimacy going on. We watch a Miley Cyrus plummet. I didn't watch Hannah Montana, but you watch her plummet from being a teen star, and the society celebrates it somehow. Now, it's a lot more than contraception. It's a lot of things. But the lack of seeing this most fundamental aspect of the human person in our social relations turned into a government policy that we are going to basically strafe our way with drugs and devices. And I'm not making a categorical statement here. But I think it's a reality, and it's just as futile as thinking that we're going to bomb our way to a good result in the Middle East. I have no clue what the resolution in the Middle East will be. But we're bombing one side and then the other. And frankly, we have to look very deeply inside ourselves, to our moral core, and decide what kind of men and women we're going to be. Are we for permanent values? Are we for keeping our promises? Are we saying what we, are we for meaning what we say when we offer someone a hand or a kiss or a handshake? And if we're not doing that, then no wonder there is so much distrust, so much lack of confidence, and so much breakdown at the most fundamental relationships in human life. And I think maybe it's the fruit of having grown up in the house in the 50s, where things were not ideal, but society was generally pro-life. Pornography, not much in evidence. Hugh Hefner was still glaring over the horizon. We didn't have a high rate of divorce. We had a booming economy. It didn't seem at the time like such a bad place. And I think there's just a yearning for people to get back and be real again and be willing to debate some really hard stuff, because we started to view each other as instruments and not as people. And I think that's the beginning of all the trouble.
Well said. All right, we'll take a last question here in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Dan Cummins, pastor here in Washington, D.C. And this may just be coming from a 60-year-old baby boomer, but one of the civic organizations that I've not heard mentioned so far is the church. And your beautiful work on the 2014 index is, unfortunately for me, an indictment of the church failing to do its job meeting social and civic needs in our culture. My question is to you and to the organizations like Paul and Save the Stork. What are the indicators you are are you facing any opposition or apathy from the church in today's society in regards to addressing these social issues that are rapidly becoming politicized by groups that have a radical agenda against these social values that we have taken as our norms over the years?
Brad, and then Christine, would you like to make a comment on the role of the church and its potential for helping in these ways?
Sure. I think one, I guess I would make 2 points about the role of churches and religious institutions in the country. One is I think they often don't get the credit that they are due, and that is that we do know that couples who attend together are at least 35% less likely to get divorced than their peers who don't. And so there is, and folks who attend churches are also more likely to get married in the first place. So there is something good going on, and that something good needs to be, I think, acknowledged and recognized and appreciated. But I would also say that it would be helpful for churches to do two things to strengthen their outreach to younger adults, couples, and the like. One is to talk more about marriage, both, sort of the advantages of marriage, but also kind of the difficulties of married life, family life. I think a lot of couples are sitting in the pews and they may be struggling with their own marriage or with their kids or something else, unemployment, and they don't feel like their difficulties are acknowledged or addressed, and that may lead them down a bad path, not having that sense that they're in solidarity with their larger religious community. But the second thing I think it's important for churches and other institutions to do is to recognize that today it's really poor and working class Americans who are less likely to be regular churchgoers. So that wasn't true 40 years ago, but it is true today. And to be much more intentional about reaching out to less educated Americans. I mean, there's no Campus Crusade for Christ, reaching young adults today who are working at McDonald's or at Walmart for that matter, and that shows up in the sort of trends about who's sitting in the pews on any given Sunday. So I think we have to be thinking about how can we reach working class and poor Americans who today are much more likely to be unchurched, and to give them the community, the message, and the support that religious institutions do for their lives in general, but also for their prospects for marriage in particular.
Yeah, I think a lot about just working with youth, sort of the marriage education. We think about premarital counseling that happens when a couple is engaged, but it really should begin from the very beginning with very young children. What does marriage look like? It's not necessarily this ideal, sort of wedding day, picture, but marriage is, it can be hard. It's, it requires commitment, it requires work, but to begin that from very early on, and not just, for the members of a church, but I think what Brad's point about just the community, I think of youth organizations that are out and, just doing after-school programs or, childcare, for working families. There are all these different avenues that these churches, there are local communities that they can do outreach, and they have very effective ways to do that, and to slowly work at that so that when kids grow up, they have that modeling or that information. We talk about information all along, rather than when they hit their late teens or 20s, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, how do we deal with relationship? We don't know, So beginning young, and then doing community outreach, working with young people, young kids even, Sunday school, drawing them in from the community, not just the members that are attending the church, I think can do a lot of work.
I think we have one more comment coming from Paul. I know Brad has the opportunity to get the word out on media, so you might need to exit stage right. So we'll thank you very much for being here. Paul, go ahead.
I just want to say one quick thing about this, Dan. Yeah. I call sometimes some trends in the church and in Christianity, I call it sexy Christianity or trendy Christianity. And by that I mean there's certain movements that are popular. In the evangelical world, we're really all about we got to get rid of sex trafficking, or we got to build wells in Africa. And is there anybody in here that is for sex trafficking, or is there anybody that you know that's advocating for, sex trafficking, or doesn't want wells in Africa? I want wells in Africa, and I abhor sex trafficking. But when you say, as a Christian, you're pro-life, or you start talking about being pro-life in the church, all of a sudden you're going, whoa, let's get the politics out of now. And what we've found is this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. Life is not. We want to, as Storks, we want to strip this of any political stuff or right or left. This is a justice issue. Just as sex trafficking is a justice issue, just as race is a justice. So I want us to pray, to your comment, along with this marriage thing, because this isn't a left or right issue. It's an issue after God's heart, and we as Christians and Catholics, we need to come together and frame this in the right way.
All right, well, I think we are going to close here, but I want to thank Christine very much for joining me on this panel, and Brad as well, Chuck and Paul for your comments, and Catherine Jean Lopez for co-hosting today, and the National Review Institute for co-sponsoring our event. Please do pick up an index of culture and opportunity on your way out, and look for this publication annually so that we can make a difference in the indicators that are affecting the culture in America. Thank you.